This is CORDIScovery. Hello and welcome to this episode of CORDIScovery with me, Abigail Acton. Remember when you could wander around the internet fairly confident that what you were looking at was probably reliable? Or am I showing my age? Over the years, it seems that information is becoming less and less trustworthy. And with deepfakes and biased algorithms, it's starting to feel like disinformation might be around every corner. Identifying, tracking, and investigating online disinformation and other problematic content is an extremely complex challenge. It can lead to hate crimes and other violence, but many European police authorities do not have access to any specialized tools or technologies to help them tackle the issue. So how can they be helped? As individuals, how can we establish if we're being manipulated? We're increasingly exposed to cyber disinformation, either passively through social media feeds or actively by using search engines and specific websites that guide us to sites that reinforce our biases and build walls of prejudice. Companies are making some effort to identify and remove fake news websites and minimize the spread of disinformation on social media, but what about the search engines themselves? Could web crawlers provide an innovative way to help us audit their activity? The spread of cyber disinformation threatens our democratic values. As the amount of disinformation grows, AI, language technologies in particular, have a crucial role in detecting it. Machine learning and AI train on large language models. But what about the languages that have a smaller footprint online, those that are used less frequently? How can we strengthen AI to combat disinformation in what are called low-resource languages? Here to help us navigate the maze are three researchers who have all received support from EU science funding. Owen Conlan is a Fellow of Trinity College, Dublin, and Professor in the School of Computer Science and Statistics. He is also co-director of the Trinity Centre for Digital Humanities. Owen is very interested in user control over personalised AI-driven systems. Hello, Owen. Welcome.
Hello, Abigail. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. Joana Gonçalves-Sá is a researcher both at the Nova Lab for Computer Science and Informatics and in the Laboratory of Particle Physics in Lisbon, where she leads the Social Physics and Complexity Research Group. Her focus is on human and algorithmic biases using fake news as model systems. Welcome, Joana.
Thank you so much for having me.
Marian Šimko is an expert researcher at the Kempelen Institute of Intelligent Technologies in Slovakia. Marian focuses on natural language processing, information extraction, low-resource language processing, and the interpretability of neural models. Welcome, Marian.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Nice to have you. Owen, I'm going to turn to you first. The Vigilant project is developing an integrated platform, advanced disinformation identification and analysis tools and technologies, employing state-of-the-art AI methods. So I know your focus is on human-centric AI, Owen, but can you explain what you mean by that term?
Yeah, certainly. Human-centric AI is trying to understand the symbiotic interaction between humans and AI systems, and really to allow humans and users to appreciate how an AI agent works on their behalf. And that's quite a complicated thing, because you don't want to get into the weeds and the very fundamental details of convoluted algorithms and so on. That doesn't serve anybody. But the flip side is you don't just want an AI agent to say, here's your answer, and a very black box solution. So where's the middle ground? So when we use the phrase human-centric AI, we're trying to find a personalized way for a user to be shown how an AI agent is functioning on their behalf, illustrating which key pieces of information are being used to generate the responses and illustrate that. And for us, when we generate responses, the main thing is we're trying to highlight really problematic content that the user needs to attend to understand maybe the context of an investigation, or to maybe understand that this is potentially disinformation. So how do we make sense of that for the user?
Okay, that's clearer, thanks. Owen, I know that you worked on a project called Provenance in the past, and that focused on helping people to navigate these complexities. Can you first just touch on that before we move on to Vigilant?
Absolutely. Provenance was aimed at ordinary users like you and I, as we're navigating content on the web, particularly in social feeds, to try and illustrate where certain items in that social feed may have problematic signals within them. So what do I mean by problematic signals? I mean maybe very emotive language being used in the presentation of something that is claiming to be news, or something that is using terminology that we know can be really quite challenging in how maybe it's referring to different members and groups of society. Or it's using media assets that we know have occurred in other contexts, and now they seem to be used in a very different context. So we're very careful in that situation not to claim that something is fake news. We are trying to illustrate that there are problems potentially in how this is being represented, and then to some degree leave that to the user. Now, that only works if in hand you offer the user with the ability to scaffold and learn about disinformation, why it's deployed, what kinds of tropes and mechanisms are used to trigger us. And mostly they're very strong emotional triggers that disinformation is trying to respond to, and get us to kind of just shift our beliefs ever so slightly, whether it's towards vaccines or certain political perspectives, and all of that. So Provenance looked at this deeply, and one of the key things we saw was the role that our personality traits really play in our susceptibility to disinformation, and then also the role that those traits play in how we might have interventions to allow a user to interact with that information in a controlled and understood way. So they're not just seeing a thing, believing a thing. They're seeing a thing and they're starting to question, is this real? However, one challenge in all of this is to ensure that people can still learn that there is content online you can trust. Because if what we do causes people to question everything fundamentally and not believe anything, then everything is a conspiracy and nobody can trust any content online. So there's a fine balance to maintain here.
Yes, that's very true. Yes, indeed. Yeah, I can see the logic of that. Super. Okay, well, if we moved on to Vigilant then. So Vigilant, I know, was concerned perhaps with providing tools for police authorities, which we might call PAs going forward. Can you tell us more about the kind of tools that the project is creating?
Certainly. One of the challenges PAs have is to, first off, like all of us, there's so much content online, to understand what content might be problematic from a criminal perspective. Now, we have to be very careful here. This is not mass surveillance. This is when a member of the public or through some other investigatory path, an area of content is being now focused on because there's a suspicion that there's criminal activity there. The kind of criminal activity we're talking about are often in extremist activities, people trying to stoke members of society to act in criminal and antisocial ways. And this occurs in platforms that all of us use maybe benignly, but some people don't use them in such benign ways. So a good example for us would be to illustrate maybe a group claiming something falsely, and this is where the disinformation part comes in. So they might, for example, this is just a hypothetical situation, they might claim that a mosque is to be built at a very sensitive area on La Ramblas. So depending on that claim and the conversation around it, that's either just a piece of disinformation, which is in itself not illegal, but if people start to mobilize around it and plan a riot, then it becomes an illegal activity. So the kind of tools we offer police officers are the tools that when they point them at these areas of suspicion, that it can start to harvest and understand what kind of emotions are being expressed. And what's quite strange for us is to see that some of the emotions you don't expect, you think hate would be a key indicator of a problem, and it certainly is. But happiness can be too, where you see members of that group being quite happy that they're about to organize, they're about to enact a plan. And so we're looking at logical entities, named words and so on, and emotion, and the confluence of those, and being able to visually illustrate those. So at a glance, you could look at a Telegram channel and understand where are the hot spots here, so that a police member can look at it and draw their attention there.
Right, excellent. That's super. I get it. I mean, there would probably be a sense of thrill or excitement or anticipation, which could be red flags as well. Yeah. So how do the police authorities, somebody looking at a computer trying to work out whether they need to deploy resources somewhere, how would they see this visually?
So they first off, they focus in on the channel. So we use this idea of a knot. So this idea of untying a knot. So they import a number of different informational sources. Those sources are processed for natural language, entity, emotion, a variety of different things. And they are graphed in timelines, and they're graphed in intensities. And that allows them to see essentially visual hotspots where those things co-occur.
Right, so you can see overlaps that are red flags.
Yeah.
And then a certain number of overlaps, and you start thinking perhaps we need to be present.
Well, you start to drill into the content in detail.
Right.
So it allows them to get to the crux of it and really understand is because we don't want an AI system to deploy police.
No. No.
But we want a system like this to support the detailed investigation, to then determine how resources may be best used.
So in fact, it's a way of winnowing through a huge amount of data to identify which actual sources need to be more closely examined.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a huge, huge time saver.
It's a big time saver, and also to understand the way resources might be deployed.
Yeah.
Because different countries, even in Europe, have very different ethoses that underpin how their police authorities function. So in Ireland, for example, our police force is called An Garda Síochána, which means the guardians of peace. And that really characterizes how they interact with society and so on. And the same happens in an online context. So in Estonia, they have online constables, where they're, it's walking the virtual beat. And sometimes that means knocking on a virtual door and saying, this content is not illegal, but just know we're here. We're present. We're here to make sure everything stays okay.
Yeah.
So it's and a tool like Vigilant has to sit within those very different contexts.
Yeah, indeed, because the approach is very different from country to country. That's excellent. Thank you so much. You explained that really, really well. I know that you're also interested in providing tools and resources to policymakers. So how is the material that's being created by Vigilant, the work being done by Vigilant, feeding into that, do you think?
Yeah, so this is, on one hand, very similar tools when you look at them from a distance, but the way they're focused and the kind of commentary and uplift you do to help policymakers is quite different. So we're actively engaged in another European-funded project called Athena, and Athena is looking at FIMI, so that this foreign information manipulation interference challenge. And this is a little bit more like surveillance, actually. So in a way that we should not surveil our populations in our countries, it is acceptable to look at these informational, if you can see me, I'm air quoting, informational sites. So there are large disinformation farms producing a whole variety of often AI-generated disinformation, and they're just trying to gain traction. And those appear as campaigns where you might be trying to tear down a particular political personality, and you're using a number of different avenues, and whichever gain traction, they then pump more of that information in. And what Athena does is, in a similar way to Vigilant, it harvests information from sources like that. Athena is less discriminating because it's not focused on individuals, and we have to be very careful with personal information here. But it's gathering information and it's producing similar kind of infographics and so on. So to have a data basis for informing policy decisions and policy actions and interventions. One of the challenges we often see is that a FIMI attack or campaign might crop up in a certain linguistic context. So, for example, it might occur in Greece, in Greek. It's pointing at challenges around maybe migration, and it's drawing false claims around that to stoke a population. How the Greek authorities react to that in itself is a learning. So if you can couple what they did with this kind of emergent problem with a platform like Athena, and then transport it to Italy when we start to see a similar problem in Italian language, different political context, but what can we learn from the Greek reaction in that case? Because Europe is a complicated mix of multiple different cultural, linguistic contexts, countries, but we can learn when we see these attacks, and we can try and transport that knowledge across national boundaries.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, so we can learn from each other. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'm going to turn to Joana now. Joana, Fair Audit came up with a way to audit search engines to see how browsing history influences search engines results and how that plays into the likelihood of being directed to sources of disinformation. So there's a bit of an overlap here with the work being done by Owen. Joana, can you tell us a little bit about the notion of human behavior in relation to bias? So can you explain the significance of bias online, please?
Yes. So we're talking about two different projects. In one of the projects, what we were looking at was how is it that human bias or cognitive bias can promote the spread of disinformation. So every time that we encounter information online, we have to decide whether or not we believe it. and whether or not we want to share it. And like Owen was saying, we cannot just decide that we're not going to believe anything and become completely cynical, or just believe everything and become gullible. So every time we have to make a call. And what we think, or our hypothesis, is that this call is influenced by different cognitive biases. So let's say I've already encountered this in the past and I tend to believe this. So then it comes a confirmation bias, and it's easier for me to believe information that I already believe in, further information. And also, if my friends tend to believe this, then I'm probably subject to something called an in-group bias, in which I believe them more than I believe the experts. And what we do is that we use this information as a model system, like other researchers use mouse in the lab, to study cognitive biases. And we try to see how is it that these different cognitive biases influence our spreading experience, because we can learn about people's preconceptions about the world and about the way that they decide to relate with society. So we kind of like use it the other way around. We're not exactly studying disinformation, we're using disinformation to study cognitive biases.
Which is great. That's excellent, because the understanding of how biases work also show how people are using the information or approaching the information online. So echo chambers are fostered by algorithms used by search engines to push information a user's way. So it must be very hard for disinformation to be identified by an individual. So can you tell us a little bit about what Fair Audit did in this area?
Yes. So the idea is, because it is so difficult to identify, there have been great efforts, especially for monitoring social networks, because we know that our feeds are being personalized, and they kind of feed off on these biases. It's as if the people who are planting disinformation deliberately, they know we are not perfectly rational agents, so they are feeding on these biases so that they can amplify their signal. But there have been really important works on social media, but what we've been focusing on are two other media for spreading information that are a little bit more overlooked. In particular, search engines. Search engines are typically seen as neutral and as like even a gateway for truth, and people tend to really believe what they see if they search for it. So they go, let's say, on Google or another search engine, and they search for something, and typically even especially the top ranking results are seen as the truth. So, and of course it's not true, and of course also search engines personalize what they show us based on many different things, including our location and other searches that we did in the past, and even our browsing history.
Super. So can I ask you then, what did Fair Audit develop to try and help people to recognize that they might be being pushed in a certain direction? I understand that you developed a tool that could perhaps be useful for journalists and democracy watchdogs associations to track disinformation. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Exactly. So what we did was, because it's so difficult to audit, search engines are difficult to audit, and the algorithms are proprietary and black boxes, and we did not want to rely on real people's data because of privacy concerns and also bias in the samples, we developed a system of web crawlers, typically called bots. And these bots, what they do is that they mimic human behavior. So we have this little army of bots, and they browse online, they collect cookies, and they pretend to be people. And we can have them pretend to be people of different locations and using different languages and even possibly genders or ages from their browsing history. And then they go to the search engines and they do exactly the same query at the exact same time. And what we do is that we compare what the different search engines show as results for these queries. And we've been running different studies using exactly this methodology. So let's say we have a study using the current Israeli-Palestine conflict, in which the bots can be located just across the border from each other, and they make the same queries. And then we see not only if the results are very different, but if they have particular leanings or if there are particular biases. And in this particular case, I think it's interesting because location is usually seen as neutral in terms of profiling. If I search for restaurant near me, I want a restaurant that is near me, not a restaurant that is very, very, very far away. But if we are talking about geopolitical conflicts, showing different information on the same query to people that live in different countries can be extremely problematic. We did 2 audits two similar audits, one for the European parliamentary elections, in which bots placed in different European countries ask things like, who should I vote for, or what's the best party, and also for the US presidential elections, the last ones in 2024. And then we can see how is it that these general and sometimes neutral queries offer very, very different results. And in this case, especially, for instance, let's say in the case of the European Parliament, very biased results towards...
Oh, so you actually did see some bias coming through. Uh-huh.
Oh, yes. And very much so. And I could probably have you guess on which direction of the left-right spectrum
right.
They were biased.
Yeah. Okay. How interesting. Slightly scary, though, as well. Did you find your results sort of, I presume you found them slightly perturbing?
Yes, it's scary. And even in reality, we found biases that are quite clear. So it's not very common that many of these parties are mentioned, but every time they are mentioned, they belong to a specific family. But the fact that these search engines are so widely used and so many millions of people turn to them every day, even if the biases were small and rare, it would still be worrisome because the signal can be very much amplified. But also the fact that we have this tool now that can be used by researchers, but we're trying to also adapt it for being used by journalists and the general public, but we're also informing on the EU with a pilot under the Digital Services Act to audit very large online search engines and to try to identify biases, because it's also possible that these search engines are actually being manipulated by political agents. And they are using the search engine optimization or other systems to amplify their signal without even the search engines realizing that this is happening.
Right. So sort of sneaking through some sort of back door. Gosh, yes, that's an eye-opener. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or observations to make to Joana? This is fabulous work. Yes, Owen, what would you like to say?
Yeah, this is really fantastic work, Joana.
Isn't it?
Have you considered deploying the bots to look at the AI responses we're starting to see in searches now? So I know Google Search, for example, has an AI overview on many responses. I think the opportunity for bias and steering people could be very significant there. It'd be intriguing to see how it tunes the results based on location or its understanding of the user. Is this something you're considering?
Yes, and thank you very much for the question. So we actually ran these audits also onto large language models based ChatGPT and Copilot, and asked similar questions. Who should I vote for? What are the best parties? And we even introduced a gender component, such as a woman, who should I vote for? Or as a male, who should I vote for? And the results are also very biased in the same direction. And they become even more biased if we introduce gender.
Right.
So these ones, we went directly to the platforms. But now, of course, with the integration that search engines are doing of these tools, we can also audit them directly on both the search results, the URLs that they provide, and on their AI answer, and see if the biases remain or if they are amplified, or if not, or if they're gone, if they're fixed.
Super. Thank you very much. Gosh, it's very comprehensive. It sounds like a bit of it's almost like a race, isn't it, to try and keep up and to keep coming up with innovative ways of identifying manipulation as fast as ways of manipulation appear. So that's very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to Marian now. Marian, the aim of the DisAI project based in Slovakia was to develop trustworthy AI technologies and tools for low-resource languages. We've just been talking about linguistic models and so on. So here we're interested in combating the growing threat of online disinformation in perhaps languages that have less of a footprint. Can you tell us why you got involved in this in the first place, Marian?
Yeah, as a researcher, I'm amazed how technology can help us in a plethora of tasks we do on a daily basis. Most of them are related to various forms of communication, and that's the natural for us humans. And methods and techniques from the field called natural language processing aim to support us in such everyday routines when searching, understanding, creating, or transforming some information. We have applications of this technology in our pocket today. For example, when filtering mail spam, being recommended daily news or having summarized reviews of products or services we want to buy. And utilizing language technology for disinformation combating is important and particularly motivating as we are doing it for the social good. And what is interesting here is that the phenomena of disinformation is not new for us. In fact, it is as old as humankind. But what makes it special is the power of technology that we have today, and it significantly amplifies the impact. I mean, like the amount of information, instant access to information, speed of spreading, and the rise of generative AI and the decreasing cost. So, that's an issue.
Right, absolutely. And we've been talking so far about the ability of AI to understand languages being used in order to, push information at us. DISI is doing work to open that up to languages that are less often used. So can you tell us a little bit more about the work of your project, trying to, as I say, open it up to less used languages?
Yeah, first of all, the quality or performance of recent natural language processing applications, which are widely utilizing deep neural networks nowadays, is based on quantity of data used for training. For instance, large language models are trained in a way that they read vast amounts of text from the internet and learn to predict the next word in a sentence. For example, if we have the sky is, we want to guess blue. The sky is blue. And such models learn patterns, grammar facts, just by trying to predict the next word over and over. And this is the foundation for many state-of-the-art approaches, and basically it fuels any task related with language processing that we have at hand. And this includes the tasks that we are dealing with in the DCI project. They are related to disinformation combating. The issue is when less often languages are used, and for such languages, there simply isn't enough content to provide a strong foundation for these models. So as a result, these models may struggle to understand or generate the coherent text in those languages. So most of the data is in English, Chinese, Spanish, etc. These models are far better, and this leads to unequal performance. And speakers of low resource languages get poorer quality responses. So it's less fluent, less accurate, less useful.
Right. And so what did the DisAI project do to try and ameliorate the situation?
Yeah, as a result, we focus on fact checkers and as an important role or actors in this endeavor, and as well as basic users with basic natural language processing technology. Also, they have more difficult jobs when dealing with other languages than English, let's say. And in this AI project, we focus on developing new approaches for language processing that can help with that. So that can improve performance in low resource languages. And our motivation is natural. Our native language is Slovak, and it is a vivid example of low resource language. And spreading this information is still a serious issue in Slovakia. And similar with other East European countries, the democracy here is, let's say, more fragile. So it is important to improve those methods and to help make work of fact checkers easier.
Absolutely, it's vital work you're doing. I can see that. Can I ask you what the project actually developed in terms of techniques to try and meet this challenge? I can see very clearly what the goal is and the motivation, but what did you actually do, or what is still ongoing?
Yeah, so exactly. So in this AI, my team, we're trying to develop methods, techniques and tools that can ease the work of fact checkers. And in their work, there are different tasks that can be supported by language technologies. And we particularly focus on the so-called fact-check claim retrieval task. This is one of the 4 or 5 most important tasks in the pipeline. And simply put, when a fact checker comes upon a new claim, for instance, like vaccination changes human DNA, they want to know whether it was already fact-checked by somebody else before, or at least it can help them significantly, because the creation of fact-check is quite demanding. And it's good if we can check all the languages and seek whether it was already fact-checked by somebody else. I mean also in Portuguese or Indonesian language, and this can significantly reduce efforts they put into the creation of fact checks.
Okay, that's a nice example. Thank you very much for that. Super. Okay, well explained, Marian. Thanks. Anyone got any observations or comments to make to Marian? Yes, Owen, please.
Marian, this is essential work. We see this all of the time in our attempts to try and combat disinformation. The lack of data sets in different languages contexts. The fact that for us, of course, for the police, they're trying to combat disinformation that may not be in the language that they speak themselves, and can often be in a language that's not well represented in data sets. One area recently we saw a particular challenge was finding data sets for hate speech in German. And, that sounds like something that you should be able to discover relatively easily, but it really depends on where the focuses are in different researchers in those linguistic contexts as to whether they exist. So we try to translate hate speech from English to German, and as you can understand, that didn't work very well. Simple things like portmanteaus, so phrases like Hillary Clinton, that makes sense to us as a hateful term in an English context, and it is a hateful term, but you can't translate that. So there's so many contextual, cultural, tied-in aspects. So that's why this work is essential.
Well, the work of all of you is absolutely essential. And I've just enjoyed so much listening to you and hearing what you've been up to and what you've achieved so far. And of course, as I said earlier, it's ongoing. A race against the disinformation techniques that are pushed our way. So thanks very much for that and for doing what you're doing to try and clarify a little bit our online lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. You're very welcome. Bye-bye. Take care. If you've enjoyed this podcast, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and check out the podcast homepage on the Cordis website. Subscribe to make sure the hottest research in EU-funded science isn't passing you by. And if you're enjoying listening, why not spread the word? We've talked about how our gut influences our brains, the latest technology that is helping scene of crimes investigators in cases of rape, and how to land a probe on an asteroid. In our last 47 episodes, there'll be something there to tweak your curiosity. Perhaps you want to know what other EU-funded projects are doing to turn back the tide of digital disinformation. The Cordis website will give you an insight into the results of projects funded by Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe that are working in this area. The website has articles and interviews that explore the results of research being conducted in a very broad range of domains and subjects, from dodos to neutrinos. There's something there for you. Maybe you're involved in a project or would like to apply for funding. Take a look at what others are doing in your domain. So come and check out the research that's revealing what makes our world tick. We're always happy to hear from you. Drop us a line, editorial@cordis.europa.eu. Until next time.